Hey, the Ruler DMO73 here, bringing you a feature match between myself on Almerius, Moojdart, Duet of Light shenanigans with Lab versus Josh and his take on Drei. Let's go ahead and jump right in.
This session brought to you by Odyssey Games for pre-orders and sealed product, TCG Prime for tons of singles and supplies, Cardo Doko for international rulers looking for products, and FoulLibrary.com for articles and wonderful deck lists.
As well as our guest lecturer members King Pearlshine, Vite Ramen, Mognite, and Darren Noblock.
Class is in session.
So as we get started here, just want to send you a reminder again about the upcoming April 1st Ruler School Discord exhibition match here. You can you can sign up. It is April 1st and 2nd, and you get a chance to play for one of these exclusive 8 playmats, the top 8 versions of which this playmat will never be printed again after this event. So this is your only chance to shoot for it, as well as provide some assistance as a fundraiser for FoulFest 3 and get some prize points for yourself. So we're going to be jumping in here with another take on Drei versus Almerius Moojdart. The idea for the Almerius Moojdart list was very driven by Logan Moses and his recent second place finish at the GP using Duet of Light and stuff to be able to mess with Seth the Arbiter and the Lab of Blessing and stuff like that. It is very cool. The idea was, well, we also get access to things like Final Stance and stuff like that we can make use of, again, because of the recent changes to the ban list. So why not kind of take that lab engine and throw it into Almerius Moojdart as just another tool for that deck to make use of. And we'll see how it goes. We also then get 2 reanimate things as opposed to just casting Duet of Light to be able to reanimate or trying to use Dexius advice. So that is the idea. We do get that extra 6-card hand to start with, and we'll see how it goes against Drei and Josh's list. Almerius Moojdart will certainly be sticking more resonators to board than when we were playing against Olga, so the idea of Famine coming into play is a lot more prevalent here. So we'll have to see exactly how that plays out for the Drei list. Starting hand there, post-mulligan, you see we have both Linosvaria and Final Stance in there. Certainly not cards that we want to see in our hand, but with the beauty of Moojdart, we can eventually filter those away. So going through mulligans here, and then we'll jump right in. Calling Stone with Almerius, we hit that Magic Stone of the Cat Moon, look into it, and promptly saying pass. We're probably going to go for an end of turn Raya there, provided we have one to start getting something like Lab dumped to the graveyard, but we'll see. Magic Stone of Heaven's Rift on the side of Josh, so it looks like both of us will be using a black-white deck of some kind. And down comes the Flute, an excellent card for Drei, as we've seen in previous matches. Drawing for turn, and then we're going to go ahead and use Mikage Raya. And then in response to Mikage Raya's mill effect, we are actually going to chase, I believe, with Moojdart's ship to bottom, just, you know, as an option here. Yep, we're going to chase it with Almerius's draw and ship a card to bottom, just to try to get one of those cards we might want to mill out of our hand and go to graveyard. Now, there is a world where we could just right here, just dump Final Stance, call Stone with Moojdart, and then if we hit a white stone, just immediately go into Final Stance to take another turn. But ultimately, we're not particularly worried about Josh being able to hit our graveyard, and so we are just going to go ahead and dump Lab to be able to just have that as something we're not going to have to worry about drawing. The other nice thing about playing the Almerius idea is that if we want to try to reanimate multiple things at once, it's not as vulnerable to something like Light Child or Angelic Battle Barrier, because like Duet of Light is one card and then Judgmenting Almerius isn't casting a spell, and so there's a way to kind of play through that and get to having both of the things that we want on field at once without having to worry about it. Good thing we didn't try to go for the Final Stance, because that is a black-green stone, and that would prevent us from being able to Judgment with Almerius. So we're just going to 4C and then ship the turn over to Josh, because we cast Raya on our turn, so there is no need, there's no way for her to be able to swing in. Probably going to see something at the end of turn for Josh, whether that's putting a +1/+1 counter on something, or banking the will from Flute in a certain way. Yes, we do see that Tea Party, a great card for white decks to be able to just kind of make use of. Moves to recovery. It's going to go ahead and just go straight into using the Tea Party, it looks like. just to try to dig a little bit deeper. Paying 2 and casting Gene, the Famished Punisher. This is one of the good things, like I've said before, about having something with Famine and things like Tea Party that we didn't see in the last Drei list, in terms of like the ability to give your white resonators quick cast lets you really be able to manipulate things that maybe shouldn't be quick cast. In the fact that like Gene's now going to be able to pop that Rhea, get some counters on her, and then going to go into Josh's turn and be able to make some moves. This is a pretty strong kind of responsive turn to the Almerius list. Do see he has a followers there, and if you're not aware, Gene plus contract plus followers is actually an infinite, so it'll be interesting to see if Josh can find his way to it before the concern about the Seth Lab combo comes into play. That being said, infinite attacks doesn't really matter, doesn't really care about my life being 7,000 or less, but the early aggression necessarily is helpfully mitigated by the fact that I'm playing Almerius, and I've got a little bit of a buffer to just kind of take these swings until he gets to that infinite stage. Checking exactly the wording of Lab to see how he wants to kind of mess with this. Obviously popping with addition, any kind of addition hate. There's like a sequence of where if you have Lab, you're trying to play Seth, or if you have Seth, you're trying to get Lab. There's a lot of ways to be able to interact with the two of them. But if they ever hit field at the same time, it's bad news bears for Josh. So we're wondering if he has any kind of way to be able to remove the graveyard, at least built into the deck. But we'll have to see exactly what he has in store. I think he's probably thinking about whether or not he wants to keep that card on top for his, does decide to keep it there for his 4C and swing in for 9 with Gene. And then we are going to go ahead and use the God Art of Child of Death here. He does decide that he wants to kind of get that to his hand right away. And it makes sense because the card that he has there is Charlotte, 2-drop Charlotte. So being able to access something like Dispelling Stone from the sideboard right out the gate would be very, very helpful for him. Especially to be able to interrupt the Lab. That does kind of signal to me that I have to be a little bit more cautious in terms of how I'm going to approach going for the Lab idea. I need to be able to protect it and kind of respond and deal with the Charlotte, just immediately giving him access to a Dispelling Stone. Before recovery on my turn, we're going to go ahead and go Tea Party and a second Rhea. This is probably going to ditch our second part, which is going to be Seth the Arbiter, hitting in there to the grave. So now both of the combo pieces are sitting there waiting, and we are at a point where we could potentially, if we had 3 light sources, we could be at potentially a point to be able to go in for the Seth this turn because of the Tea Party. Unfortunately, because we have 1 darkness source, like a dark green, it's probably not going to be what happens this turn. We're probably going to wait 1 more turn for it. After the Rhea has milled, we're going to go ahead and use Moojdart to filter. Almerius should be tapped because we used her to call Stone last turn. Just a little bit of a mischaracterization there. We are going to ship that Linosfaria back to the bottom of the deck. Get it out of the hand. Linosfaria, another excellent card for Rhea to be able to mill and then grab back with Duet of Light. Just to be able to have a lot more protection during your own turn. Calling Stone with Moojdart, hitting an Amadeus the Holy Crystal, so that is a 5-color stone, which is great. Like I said, if we had 3 white sources, we'd probably go in for the play right now, but it would also tap us out, and we know for a fact that there is access to some kind of Dispelling Stone addition hate line, so the best practice for us would be to just wait for 1 more turn so that we have at least 1 way to be able to interact, and instead we're just going to throw down some pressure. So we start to go to flip Almerius and just kind of verifying exactly how we want to sequence this, start to kind of see that we are going to try to go into the line, and then we're like, wait a minute, we don't want to do that. We need access to Duet of Light Will. We have access to a grand total of exactly 4 will right now, and so it doesn't help us to be able to push in at this point. We are still going to cast a Duet of Light here, and I think the thought is that we might have a second one in hand, and so we're going to try to bait out something at this point in time by going for the lab. Like, hey, if we have a second Duet of Light in hand, so if he burns his addition removal right now on this Duet of Light, on this lab here, then we can just re-get it back next turn and not have to worry about trying to protect the lab, just kind of constantly threaten it to the point where he has to burn his resources in order to be able to answer it, and then we just bring it right back. This also does help us in the fact that we're probably going to put +1/+1 counters on Rhea and just stop her from being a famine target, which is very nice. Prevalence of famishment is going to come down in response to that. While it still has famine just to kill the Rhea and give himself an extra 4 life, totally respect that. Burning the counters off of Jean to pay for the alternative cost, because he wants to again leave the will open to be able to play something like the Charlotte. So we are just going to have lab is now in play. We can do kind of whatever we want, and then we're going to ship the turn to him. At the end of the turn, we're going to go ahead and see him use put a tea party into the investment, which is certainly not something we want to see, because again, that just gives him more cards, and we say, okay, that's fine. Does mean, though, that Charlotte's certainly not going to come down this turn, which feels nice for us. Unless he wants to burn the tea party right away, which that feels a little bit awkward. See, he has double followers in hand, has the Charlotte. Could choose to use Flute to put more +1/+1 counters onto Jean right now, which I don't think would be a bad idea, just to maximize both the damage it's going to do, as well as, you know, having a +1/+1 counter to be able to pay for an alternative cost, which is kind of Dry's whole deal, especially if he can get to another contract, because he will be able to go into contract this turn. Problem is he doesn't have anything in graveyard to really reanimate with the contract, which is not super great. This is why something like Dark Alice or any kind of draw discard can be helpful in this deck, just to help get those things to a graveyard to be able to reanimate. Or heck, even in the case of using like Mikage Rhea, if you're going for a black variant, to dump something like Hera, the white-black Olympian. It can be something that you can reanimate off of summon the Wolf of Famine. We are going to see a Pierre, a tried and true white 1-drop staple, come down here, very clearly trying to come after my lab. We say, you know, let's think about it. Do we want to cancel it now, or do we want to try to cancel something when he's got, you know, have to have a heavier commitment? We say, no, that's fine. You can go in for the Pierre. We let the Pierre resolve. In response to him burning the counters off Pierre, now we're going to try to grip some stuff out of his hand by saying, well, in response, we'll go ahead and discard a card to lab to force you to discard a card. Let's see what we can get out of your hand here just to minimize your options, and what we can get you to cast out of your hand. Looks like he starts to consider going in for the Flute, or for the Charlotte right there. Ultimately, though, he does just to decide to discard the followers, which I think is the absolute correct call for him, because now his summon the Charger of Famine, or summon the Wolf of Famine, can be used immediately if he can get into one and set up for the infinite. Swings in with Jean and with Pierre for a total of 11 damage, taking me down to 5,000, and then at that point in time, leaving himself open with 4 will to be able to interact during my turn, which is totally fine. Draw a Call Stone. Hit a Magic Stone of Moonshade there. So now with our Tea Party, we have access to 5 will, which is enough. Trying to do this kind of sequencing in the right way. We're going to go ahead and cast a Duet of Light with the mode to try to reanimate Lab and gain 2,000 life here, because there's nothing to put +1/+1 counters on. There's no real point there. So you see he does have the Charlotte. We know that he has the Charlotte. We're fully anticipating that to be something we have to contend with, but now we have a lot more will to be able to mess with it. Then we're going to go ahead and use Tea Party to try to recover a stone and get access to a second white source here, so that we can then go into Judgmenting Almerius, and then Almerius can try to reanimate Seth. So we get to draw a card here, and then, you know, pay ourselves down to 68 to flip over Almerius and reanimate Seth. And if we get this Seth onto field, it's going to be a bad time. So attempting to do Judgment, Josh knows what's coming. He's like, okay, well, what do I want to do here? How many cards do you have left in hand? You have 4. Okay, so let's see exactly what we want to do here. Choosing to do it in response to Judgment as opposed to response to target, I think is maybe a little bit of a misplay, because, you know, if he does end up pushing through whatever kind of answers I have, I can pivot with Almerius. That being said, I don't really have any targets in the graveyard at this point in time outside of Seth, because there's just not a lot of good stuff there to be able to reanimate. But it is still something to kind of to make sense of in terms of optimization of how you would want to respond in the situation. It would always be best to wait until Judgment resolves, because we don't have a way to cancel Judgment, to wait until a commitment of what I'm targeting has happened before the responses start being done. We are going to go ahead and see him start to cast the Charlotte. We say that's fine. You absolutely can cast the Charlotte. I got no responses to that. In response to, and then with Charlotte's enter effect, we are going to go ahead and see Alice's Fantastic Trick, and in response, we have a Garion. So we did have the way to, with exactly 5 will, to be able to answer the addition hate here. Now, he does have Tea Party. He could find another thing. There is a world where he could have sequenced that in such a way where he casts something first using the Tea Party and then goes into the Charlotte, so that Alice's Fantastic Trick is unchaseable. But who knows if he had another quick cast white card. He decides to leave the Tea Party because he knows what the top card of his deck is at this, he knows what the top card of his deck is, and he knows that he's not going to go for it. Oh, maybe he's just going to try to commit. Hits another Tea Party, and then draws. So, like, he would have been in a situation there where he could have, if he had just waited, if he had gone for the Tea Party line first, he could have gone up to 3 cards, so that the Fantastic Trick could have been unchaseable. And then because he has a quick cast guy, he's going to go ahead and cast another Followers just to get out of his hand before anything stops. So because of that missequencing here, we do successfully get Seth the Arbiter and Lab out at the same time, and we're in for some trouble. So I can discard a card. This is how the loop works. We discard it. I draw a card because I Judgmented with Moojdart. We discard a card to Lab, which forces him to discard a card, but then Seth says, hey, your opponent discarded a card, draw a card. And we do that over and over and over again until Josh has no cards. And we can continue to do that until the game is over, or he successfully removes Seth from the game. Now, keep in mind, he does have a creature that has precision in the form of if he can get +1/+1 counters on his stuff, which he can because of Goddart, to be able to give precision to Jean. But at that point in time, we're never going to try to block with Seth, and we are always going to block Jean with Almerius, just so that, like, Seth is never going to get killed here. And so at this point in time, because of this setup, if he can't remove Jean, if he can't remove Seth, or he can't remove Lab, Josh just doesn't get a hand for the rest of the game. That being said, he can quick cast stuff if he happens to draw into something that has quick cast. But it is still, you know, like Age of Famine that he just saw off the top. That's not a card he's ever going to get to cast, so might as well ship it down to the bottom. And because our life total is so high, we honestly don't care if he swings at us and for any other creatures, any of his resonators. We're just going to take the damage and tank it. It's always fun to see a card from so long ago in Force of Will's history. This is from Moon Priestess Returns, set 3, kind of finding a new space in this world to create a pretty interesting board state. So, you know, Seth the Arbiter, every time I discard his opponent, he discards a card, I draw a card, and anytime he loses a Resonator, I get to buy back a Resonator from my graveyard, which is really cool, especially since I'm discarding a lot of Resonators. So swings in with Pierre. Swings in with the Believers, who then get 2 +1/+1 counters because they have successfully dealt damage. I go down to 6,400 or 6,200. Ultimately, it's a question for Josh of how much does he want to swing this turn. There's a really big piece of, like, next turn I'm going to be sitting on 5 will. With the ability to buy back a bunch of 1-drop Resonators, and so I'm probably going to clear his board at this point. He's going to put a +1/+1 counter on Jean, so she swings in for 8. We say that's fine. We will take the damage, no problem. Swings in with Charlotte for another 6. We say that's fine. We'll take that damage, no problem. And then we just pass the turn. So going into my turn here, we get to recover, call Stone with the Moojdart. We're not even going to call Stone first. We are just going to start with another Duet of Light, but this time all 3 modes, to grab back another Seth the Arbiter, gain 2,000 life, and put 4 +1/+1 counters on all of them before we even call Stone. And so now what happens is every time he discards a card, we draw 2 cards, and every time he loses a Resonator, we buy back 2 Resonators, because both Seths will trigger. Now we can call Stone, hit that 4C Stone, and kind of just go to town at this point, which is really, really not great for Josh at this point. It's going to be very hard for him to be able to keep up at that point in time, especially when we have, you know, a lot of 1-drop Resonators. Like I said, we flash in Dark Alice, we draw, we kind of sculpt our hand a little bit here. We can then banish it to Lab. We can even swing in with the Seth the Arbiters at this point to also serve to spot remove. Like, Seth the Arbiter is big enough now, it's a 10/10, so we'll hit Pierre. And that will then trigger the Seths to buy back Resonators, although I'm choosing not to apparently in this instance. Swing with Almerius, he removes the counters to pump that up, so he gains a little bit of life, prevents all the damage, so we don't get to kill anything there. It's like, oh, well, that was smart. We can't get to do anything else there. And then we're just going to banish the Dark Alice to Lab and say, like, okay, please banish a Resonator. If we get him to banish the Charlotte, great. If we get him to banish the Flute, great. If we get him to banish the Jean, great. Like, any of these that he has to get rid of is just golden at that point. And then at that point in time, because it dies, we can actually just use both the Seths and buy back the Dark Alice we just banished. You also see we have that Lumia there that we can use to make use of in the same way, paying some life. Like, we're in such a, like, big control position here from just, like, telling Josh that he just is not going to get to play the game anymore, that might be wise to concede. There's no quick cast board wipe that can really answer this position. You see, he did draw into the contract here, which is great, but we're just going to force him to discard it. And then because we made him discard a card, both Seths trigger and we get to draw 2 cards. So I do not mean to make this back-to-back weeks of Drei getting bullied, but the sequencing here has certainly not worked out in Josh's favor, of not being able to keep the combo off the board. That being said, he was set up to be able to go for the infinite if he could pull off contract this turn. So if we did have a way to pop the Lab, he would have just used Jean and followers to go infinite, and then I lose. Does just decide to go ahead and say we'll pass the turn here. We'll flash at another Dark Alice. Draw, discard the final stance, back to the deck. We did see a Angelic Battle Barrier, which at this point in time is practically worthless. So we'll use the Dark Alice, banish it to lab, force him to banish a Resonator, banishes the followers, and then we get to buy back both the Dark Alice and the Dark Alice and the Lumia again. Oh, choosing to banish the Charlotte, interesting. The Seth's triggered, we buy back the Lumia and the Dark Alice again, and we can just loop this forever in terms of like use Dark Alice to flash in stuff and use Lumia to flash it to draw cards, keep our hand full, and then banish them both and then buy them both back, and then like it'll just keep going forever and ever and ever until we eventually just punch through with our big board, especially since Almerius is able to pump up the whole board +2/+2 as well. We're probably like one turn away from just swinging in for lethal, just from the perspective of like he does have quite a bit of life here, and we just want to fully lock him out before we push in for the game. Swings in with followers. We say that's fine. We'll take the damage. You can gain your life. That is okay. Removes the counters for Jean. Swings in and then just passes the turn. Draw for turn here. Because it's not a white source, we don't have a way to quick cast in a Resonator right now, but we are just going to keep calling stones and kind of getting to the point of like massive value, probably getting rid of these last two Resonators here. Just casting Lumia to replace itself with the drawing a card, probably banishing her immediately to force him to lose a Resonator to lab. Does decide to finally banish the followers. The Seth's trigger, buy us back the Lumia and one of the Witch of the Fallen Kingdoms. Just for good measure, we're going to go ahead and cast everyone's favorite 3-drop DVV card, Athenia, just to recover some stones. The idea here being if you want to go infinite, like this is now truly where the game just doesn't end if I don't want it to, because I can use Athenia to just kind of keep recycling my graveyard back into the deck, so I just never run out of resources, whereas my opponent will eventually run out. A million cards in my hand, can go for lethal, can swing in, just punch face at this point in time, and that is pretty much going to be the game, unless Josh draws into something ridiculously good and quick cast next turn to be able to answer the fact that I will be sitting on 8 cards, a bunch of quick cast stuff, lab to be able to force him to banish, and staring down absolute lethal. And he can't even reanimate because now we have the Athenia to be able to mess with the graveyards. Determining what cards we're going to keep, knowing full well that we're probably going to buy many of them back. You see I have a handful of attribute cancels, Tea Party, Persephone, Viola, just like everything I need to say like, well, you're not going to be able to do anything here anyway. He does top deck into Fall of Comets, which like, I have +1/+1 counters, so it's not super great, but it would have been cool to be able to board wipe. And so at that point in time, with that being discarded, Josh is just going to say, nope, let's scoop it up, and we're going to go into game 2. So here we are in game 2. Josh choosing to go first, which is, I think, an interesting choice here. Maybe hoping to just kind of establish more presence before the lab gets into play. You see Angelic Battle Barrier can be really helpful. Does see Contract, does see Flute, does see Age of Famine. Like there's some pretty good tools here kind of to mess with stuff initially. Does decide to ship everything except Contract and the +1/+1 counter, and the Flute, I think, is the 2 cards he keeps. Keeps a Tea Party, a Followers, and a Charlotte. This is a pretty good opener to be able to mess with Lab for sure. And so we'll have to see exactly how this plays out. So going into it with Calling Stone. The question is if he boarded in any evil elemental uprisings. Like, that would be a really good card against this matchup because we're really abusing kind of a reanimator strategy. And so boarding into something like evil elemental uprisings would work really well for you. We do see a Moonshade and then a pass the turn. At the end of the turn, we're going to see a Tea Party committed. Go to recover. So Josh sitting at 4-wheel on turn 2. Certainly a turn where he can make a play happen. Especially does set him up nicely for being able to make use of Charlotte right out the gate. Do see a commitment here for the followers, which I think is a strong, place to play here. It does take my deck, turns to set up, and also deciding to, looks like, pre-commit to the Pierre, which I think is also very good in this situation. I mean, we are a deck that does not have a lot of spot removal. Our removal is trying to force you to banish stuff. So putting in something like Pierre out the gate is probably going to sit there for a while, and I have to deal with it if I want to go for an addition. So we do see swing in for 4, flash in a Mikage here. The idea being we're going to send something to graveyard. It's probably not going to be lab at this point. Sending him with Mikage to try to block, to either force him to burn a counter for the spot removal so that he can hit me for 4 and thus not be able to pop additions, or just accept that it's going to be a trade, at which point in time Pierre's not going to be on field to be able to pop additions. So like, it's kind of a win-win for us either way. He could burn his God's Art here proactively to make his Pierre a 6/6. That's certainly something to consider. But even in that point in time, there's so much more potential value that he could get from that God Art, especially to potentially save a gene that might be worth saving it. And so it doesn't seem like this is an opportunity where he's going to burn that God Art for sure. So threatening the Mikage here makes a lot of sense. We do pitch the final stance. He does decide to burn the counter. We're like, that's great. We will go down in life. We will take the damage, no problem. Go to recovery. Calling stone, filtering with Moojdart first. Always good to sculpt your hand as best as possible. Calling stone with Moojdart. And we say, look, you know what? If you're going to be aggressive, we're going to be aggressive too. So we're going to go ahead and burn some life here and use Almerius and flip. We say, I don't think you have anything to mess with the graveyard. I think we're just going to go for it. We're going to try to reanimate final stance right out the gate with Almerius, just to say, look, I'm going second, but I want to be up on stones on you. I'm essentially going back to me going first, and we'll see if that final stance gets to resolve and gives me an extra turn. Josh really thinking about how he wants to respond here. Might have a way to pop the Almerius. Olafus says, nope, you got it. So we get to reanimate the final stance. Now we get to take an extra turn after this one, which feels great. And still during the end of his turn, we're going to go ahead and do Mikage to dump another card to the graveyard and make it so this Rhea can start attacking next turn. Now you would think, okay, cool, we're going to go for the Seth and stuff lab. But now that we've hit a reanimate from, we've already used the Almerius reanimate, it seems it's not really the option that we were going to go for the lab idea at this point in time. So instead, we're going to go for one of our other tech cards here, which is Faria. It's a darkness card, so we can mill it with Kage-Rhea, we can reanimate it with Duet of Light, and it does say during your turn, your opponent's stuff just doesn't have effects. And this is very, very good for us. His stuff loses any kind of ability to be able to prevent damage or manipulate or shoot things or produce will or anything else. It really just helps us kind of stay ahead. Paying some additional life here to go ahead and cast another Duet of Light. We're doing it to be able to reanimate Linosfaria and give everybody +1/+1 counters just so we don't have to worry about Famine. It's also going to draw us a card nicely. Do see a Tea Party here to see about some kind of potential response. Ultimately does not draw into it. So it looks like Duet of Light is going to get to resolve and Linosfaria is going to get to be active. The other reason why this is Linosfaria is really nice is because if we do try to set up stuff like Seth on our turn, things like Pierre, things like Charlotte's don't get enter effects and don't have the ability to manipulate to like remove counters to pop additions. So it gives us like an additional safety net to be able to play through our turn and set up kind of the combos essentially. And this is our first card of the turn, so Angelic Battle Barrier is not going to help us out here. Linosfaria enters, we're going to get to draw a card, and now he can't even produce Will with the Flute because his stuff doesn't have the ability to operate, and so his mana dorks are no longer mana dorks. He doesn't lose the abilities of his rulers. Keep that in mind. Linosfaria just hits non-magic stone entities. So his stones and his rulers still have all of their abilities. But the really thing is that we're dealing with non-magic stone entities. That's what we want to be messing with. We're going to use the Raya, who is now an 8/8, to swing at the 4/4 Pierre. Take care of that. And at that point in time, we're just going to pass the turn. A nice little early wall here to really kind of put the hurdle on a deck that relies on keywords, on keyword manipulation. At the end of the turn, we're going to go ahead and see that Child of Death Goddard just to try to mill into something, hitting a Tea Party and a Followers. The Followers is nice to see in the graveyard if he can get to a Gene, because that is kind of one of the pieces of the contract kind of infinite, which is something he can do during his turn, so it doesn't really matter. We are going to go ahead and see a Pierre here because of quick cast from the Tea Party that he tried to use in response to the Almerius reanimate. Now he enters with those counters, so that is still something he gets to come in to play with. It's just during my turn those counters don't mean anything. He can't use them for anyway. One thing in mind though is that we know there is a Pierre, so the other reason to go for Linosfaria is the fact that it naturally has Eternal, so it just can't be killed. So even with those additions, popping tokens from Pierre, those counters from Pierre, he can't remove it. It's just something that he has to deal with fully. Unless he can have a way to force me to banish it, there's just no way for him to be able to mess with it. There is a turn where I think you probably try to go for, even if you can't get the infinite, you still try to put like the Beast of Famine into play. You could even do God's Art just to make it free and still have all of your will available. Just putting the threat of it on board I think is worth your time, because you give me more time, then more layers of this kind of like chokehold of what this deck can put into play are going to come into office, or are going to come into like active status, and more Duet of Lights are going to come down, and it's like an even further hurdle for you to be able to deal with. And so trying to go in with Child of Famine might just be your best option, or with the Artemis Chrono Gear is probably just your best option. The irony of the fact that we're using Pierre, who's the one who helps get Artemis to Arla in the lore, is now being used in the deck that is using Artemis Chrono Gear. That's just a nice little nod to the history of FAO in the lore. Bet Pierre would kind of freak out if he saw this big robot. Josh really thinking through kind of how he wants to tackle this without being able to set up the infinite. Going for charge of the Wolf of Famine might not be something he's particularly interested in. Because maybe he thinks, I don't know when I'm going to draw another one. I don't know when I'm going to be able to find a gene. I don't know, what happens if this gets destroyed, or even worse, if it just gets kind of like left on field forever without being killed. Am I just going to get a situation where like you let the J ruler flip and then like its flip effect is kind of mediocre, so you just aren't super worried about it? Like, there's a lot of different kind of decision trees here. He is also staring down a hand of 7 cards with the ability to play many of them. We only have darkness and green available for us, so that might not be the best in terms of best indicator of like what threats I might have, especially since there's no Tea Party active. So to me, this feels like it is the turn to be able to take action. But we'll see exactly what Josh decides to do. Swings in with Pierre takes us down to 68. Does talk about swinging us down to 64, gain some life, get some +1/+1 counters on the followers. There's a world here where like going for chart, like summon the Famine of the Wolf of Famine here would be like good, in the sense that like you could then both of these guys, gain them +1/+1 counters, get them to recover, swing in again, because you have the access to the God's Art. Just to decide to pass the turn here, we see Mikage Rhea come down at the end of turn just to try to dump something else to the graveyard. We're going to dump that Athenia to be able to start manipulating his graveyard as well. Because we're not particularly worried about the board state. It's more of what he could open up with Summon the Charger of Famine. On our turn before recovery, just to say, look, you jumped a turn ahead, you were on the draw, stop it. We're just going to hard slam an Angelic Battle Barrier. Makes a lot of sense. There is a world where, again, if he had used, the +1/+1 counters instead from the heroes, the followers, to pay for Famine, he could have drawn a card off of the Angelic Battle Barrier. But that's a choice. We swing in with the Rhea. He chooses not to use the God Art there to pump it up. So we're just going to go ahead and gain 4. We're going to swing the Rhea into the followers who can't prevent damage, and who gets us, 8 versus 6, gets us more life there from the Rhea. And then we just pass. We can't cast anything, so we just call stone and pass. So still able to make a good use of a turn that we were silenced for. Just by keeping everything on board. And next turn, we're going to be in a spot where we can start really dumping Will into Almerius at the beginning of the turn to start giving our boards bigger and bigger pumps to push through for lethal. And that's something that's going to be a concern for Josh. Looking like we might see something before recovery. Putting a +1/+1 counter on a stone. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong with that, especially since, he has a way to remove +1/+1 counters for cost. It's essentially like, in a way, it's banking half a will for later. If he had been doing this earlier, he could have had those counters to be able to play someone the Charger of Famine, the Wolf of Famine, by just paying its alternative cost. Oh, I think it might be 4 +1/+1 counters. I don't remember. Do call a stone, hit another Cat Eye Moon. Does see the gene, so we are at a point where like the infinite is looking potentially possible. The threat is that he has to try to get it in place before I get that Athenia that he sees in my graveyard. Because if that hits field and he can't answer it, then the reanimation and any kind of attempt to go in for the infinite is just not going to be beneficial. deciding whether or not he wants to keep it on top. Does decide to commit to it. The fact that my stuff gets +1/+1 counters from Duet of Light is also a really big hurdle for this matchup. Like, reanimating something and then immediately putting +1s on it means that there is no window of opportunity where it has Famine, so that Josh can try to like spot remove it. He can't play Wolves for cheaper. He can't play, like, there's a lot of unfortunate kind of interactions between this matchup that just really make things a little bit difficult for him. Does decide to go into an Awakened Angel of False Glory. Excellent card for triple rulers, and the fact that it's very easy to awaken it because you've got rulers to spend. This would be able to pop both Final Stance and Almerius and draw him, get 2 counters on board. So we are not going to let that happen. We have the key to the spell to say no to that automatic ability and just not have to worry about it. We don't want to have our stuff, get wiped. He does have a nice blocker here. The problem being that it, during our turn, doesn't have flying because it loses it because of Lenosfaria. So, unfortunately, not going to do terribly too much in this instance since it got canceled, but it was a good attempt. End of turn, we're going to go ahead and flash in Dark Alice. Just to kind of dig through more. Going to banish the Dark Alice to itself. End of turn, we're going to go ahead and also commit to a Tea Party. Just really banking stuff and resources in for the next turn. And seeming like it's probably going to be quite a turn after all. We're going to go ahead and go for a Duet of Light, all 3 modes, to gain 2,000 life. Reanimate the Athenia and put 4+1/+1 counters on her immediately. Josh is saying, hold on, I might have something. Let me think about what my Charlotte might be able to have. In terms of one-drop white, in terms of one-drop white spells, there's not much that can help here. The other problem is Charlotte doesn't have an enter effect because of Lenosfaria. This is one of the things that I was talking about in terms of the advantage that in this matchup, the advantage of trying to stick to Lenosfaria to like essentially pseudo silence Josh from like the major interactions that he might have. He can still cast Charlotte, it just doesn't do much. Athenia then is going to get to help us float some will. We're going to spend some life to float some white and green will here and then get to recover 3 stones. Leaving the dark green stone tapped because we don't need that for what we're trying to do this turn. Still have not called stone yet. Keep that in mind. Using the floating white and 1 more, we're going to cast a second Duet of Light with all 3 modes. At this point in time, we're going to reanimate a Mikage and put 4+1/+1 counters on everything and gain another 2 life. Running out of dice. A Mikage on the top that we played so early is a 16/16. It just, you can see exactly kind of how gross this can get. The Mikage then is going to get to enter and do some shenanigans. Help us to mill a card. That greenstone should not be tapped. I think I will catch that here in a moment. Should not be untapped. I left it tapped off of the Athenia. Hopefully I don't misplay there in terms of make use of it. If I do, I apologize to our watchers. We do have 1 green floating here. Calling a stone. Paying another 2. Casting a 3rd Duet of Light to add more +1/+1 counters to everything and just grab lab. Like, I don't even need Seth at this point. I just want the lab. I have so many cards in my hand. Let's just make that happen. Or I'm actually kind of low on cards in hand. But I have enough cards to be able to manipulate his board state that it is okay. The lab comes in. We sacrifice the Mikage that we just got rid of, that we just reanimated. Can't swing this turn to force him to banish a resonator. Totally fine. Pay 1. for Lumia, who's going to replace herself. Gain myself the life back that I've spent this turn. This point in time, the life tracker on field is not particularly accurate. I think it's off by about 600. And then we're probably going to immediately banish the Lumia too, just to get that off the board. Using Tea Party to recover a stone. Banishing the Lumia to force him to banish the Angel. Paying some more life, flashing in Dark Alice. This is just to replenish our hand. We actually banished the Final Stance, and we're probably going to banish the Dark Alice as well. Mainly because we don't have Lab, but we have enough cards in hand to easily make him discard his whole hand. And so keeping the rest of the cards in our hand is designed to then make it so that whenever he top decks, we discard that. So we go, please discard 3 cards, choosing not to do it one at a time. And he goes to cast, this is a little bit of a misplay at our perspective in terms of like the management here. He goes to cast the Charlotte. He then goes to try to cast the card from sideboard that lets him remove all of the +1/+1 counters on the game. And we start to pick them up, but then we realize, oh wait, you don't have an enter effect because of Linosfaria, and so this Charlotte doesn't get to do that. So all she's going to do is just enter the field as a body. She doesn't have flying, and so that's not going to work. That doesn't help you here. And so we'll catch that here in just a second. So apologies for kind of the sequencing that you're going to see here as it goes down to it. We start to pick up all the +1/+1 counters, and then before we go any further, I go, wait a minute, that doesn't work. You have Linosfaria, nothing actually happens. So you can have the will back, you just have a Charlotte that doesn't do anything. Please continue to discard your entire hand. And so at that point in time, all of our counters are still on. He should still have one more will. There's so many counters. The 16/16 Rhea swings in the air. That's going to hit him. We can banish the Rhea to get rid of the blockers. And then Athenia and Almerius can swing in for lethal, and there's like no problem whatsoever there. We also have 2 sealed one-eyed dragons in hand. And so we can use the 1 green that we have still floating left over from Athenia to put all their cards back in the graveyard, swing it, and then like next turn, it's just like lethal. We have make him discard that card with, it's not a quick cast card, we make him discard with Lumia, and then we just swing in for lethal, and that is the game. So thankfully that stone that I recovered didn't matter, because I shouldn't have recovered it, but that is the match. Huge thanks to Josh for being willing to sit down and check out this goofy Almerius Moojdart lab combo, and also again props to Logan Moses for his success with the lab engine. It was very, very creative, and was happy to be able to try it out here. But that's it for us this time. Tune in for the deck profile for the Almerius Moojdart list later this week, and until next time, this is DMO73 saying class dismissed.